have one last little topic on advanced prosody here. This is called conversational prosody. Again, another term I made up. There's really no such thing. But the idea is that the song is designed to emulate conversation. It's not nearly as, this is sort of let me finish that thought. It's designed to emulate the way we speak. It's therefore less interested in rhyme or in regular meter. It's less interested in ta 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 and everything landing regularly and sounding like a song. It's designed to sound a little bit more like conversation. There's hundreds of years of precedent for this. This actually goes back to recitative in opera, where they'll sort of, just sort of play some sort of chord. And it's a little more rapid and not rhymed and not structured. But similar concepts about linear prosody and euphony apply here. In fact, almost more so here, because if you've got couch talk, lobster bisque, you see it's just going to be even harder to buy that. Remember we were talking about that the spoken version of Sorry with Fringe on Top. Ain't no finer rigor. I'm thinking if you care to swap, where the words just come a mile a minute. That would be conversational prosody. And if you stick in consonant clusters and things like lobster bisque, it's going to be hard to pull that off. So I don't have a heck of a lot to say about conversational prosody, because it depends entirely on the conversation that you're trying to emulate. But couple general principles here. In conversational prosody, often the heaviest accents in the music, maybe they're further apart than in traditional prosody. Maybe you have a little more space in between the accents. Think of trouble in Music Man, right here in River City. Oh, my friends, you got trouble, right? Fool. I mean, there's a lot of syllables before the next accent. Jason Robert Brown is filled with lots and lots and lots of syllables before he hits a real accent. Just as in real conversation, when we're talking, there's a lot of syllables which go by before we actually accent one. There's a lot of syllables which go by before we actually accent one. That wouldn't be true in a song. That wouldn't be true in a lyric. But it might be true in conversational prosody. Which is not to say it has to be rapid and it all has to be 16th and 32nd notes in any particular measure. But it could be that, you don't hit an accented note until, every other bar. It could be the second bar is a slight, weaker accent. Or at least doesn't have a strong accent in it. Or perhaps, if there's a strong rhythm in the accompaniment, maybe the music has added some syncopation to avoid the actual accents in order to get to the word that you're actually trying to accent. It could be that there's, a steady pulse going, but the conversation isn't paying attention to it until it finally actually hits one. All right? There's a lot of music that's coming out of Tish that emphasizes that. The score for I Love You Because has a lot of examples of that. Jason Robert Brown has a lot of examples of that, of just sliding the accent just off the beat, so that it doesn't hit like, look, what do you talk, but you gotta know the territory. It's not that. But you got to know the territory kind of thing. So it actually misses where the downbeat falls, and it's a little bit it can go farther without having an accent. All right. Having said that, here's a couple. These are characteristics. These aren't even rules. These are characteristics of conversational prosody. It typically has more syllables than conventional prosody for a lot of the reasons I've just been talking about. Typically, accents are on downbeats rather than mid-measure. There's sort of, fewer of them, and they don't really, we were talking about how accents fall on 1 and 3. Generally, the third beat is it doesn't really have an accent at it. The syllables aren't designed to hit beat 3. They're designed to hit beat 1 and beat 1 and beat 1, or maybe beat 1 and not the next one, but beat 1 in every other bar. Another characteristic of conversational prosody is that perhaps they have longer phrases than conventional prosody. Perhaps it's longer. The sentences the phrases aren't as short. Maybe they're complete sentences. And maybe even the stanzas, there are longer stanzas than conventional prosody. There's just more words going on. And lastly here, that typically phrases drive inevitably to strong endings. Like we were talking about in linear prosody, of it just absolutely, even though the words are coming and there's a lot of them and they keep going and keep going and keep going, we know that we're headed for something really important at the end of the day. That wasn't a very exciting sentence, but that's the result of it. So it's often structured to the end, even if there's 2 A sections, to drive to the end of the second A, or the end of the A. That there's not a lot of stops along the way. It just drives, and boom! All right. If you wanna study these. Look at Jason Robert Brown. He's great. He's the best at it. Look at William Finn. He does a lot of unconventional prosody. And look at the folks coming out of Tisch. Look at I Love You Because, if you can get your hands on that. Because in recent conversational prosody, you'll find a couple more characteristics here. That one, unaccented syllables often receive much more stress than they would in traditional prosody. Unaccented ones which normally wouldn't get an accent. In a Richard Rodgers score, these wouldn't make sense. In the first unit of this prosody unit, these wouldn't make sense. Unaccented syllables. Words like in or with or up or there or new of New York. That's why I'm going. That's why I'm going with my honey. We got to go up in a cab and that sort of thing. That words which don't necessarily warrant an accent are getting an accent, but because the rhythm of the accompaniment is so strong. In traditional classical prosody, you wouldn't get away with it, but because it's so jazzy and so I don't know, in the way that rap music or hip hop music will often just sort of have an accent. It has less to do with meaning than it has to do with rhythm, and in that way, because the rhythm is so catchy, and because there are so many other syllables, it's less of a problem. It's less of that's a prosody problem. But you have to be attempting conversational prosody in order to pull that off. It can't just be, I'm being 21st century here. I'm accenting with when it doesn't really actually mean it, or in a It has to be part of a conversational prosaic sort of context with a heavy rhythm. Otherwise, it's just going to be bad prosody. This is a matter of taste. I find these not very satisfying. I find them a little like, that's a little jarring. But it's quite a trend, and over the course of an evening or over the course of a song or even in the course of a stanza, if the underlying rhythm is catchy enough and it's conversational enough and there are enough words and it's driving so inevitably to the end that some of the other accents along the way that really shouldn't be getting accents, they're less egregious than they would be in other contexts. Two other characteristics in recent 21st century conversational prosody, that there's a strong driving beat of the accompaniment. That's what I was just talking about, that there's often quite a jazzy and regular downbeat, even if the downbeat isn't always recognized in the vocal line or in the lyric. The downbeat is recognized in the rhythm and the accompaniment. You set a groove going, or you set a loop going, and then the words on top of it are a little more skittery. And then lastly, there are a lot of instances of internal rhyme, not necessarily patterned rhyme, not necessarily at the ends of lines. They're little brief things which connect from time to over. In a phrase there might be a rhyme here and there, not necessarily in regular patterns, or if you do it in line 1 of the first stanza, you have to do it in line 1 of the second stanza. I don't recommend you imitate that. And in fact, in general, I don't recommend you imitate conversational prosody. It is tough to command. Compare, for instance, the last 5 years, Jason Robert Brown, where the conversational prosody is phenomenal. It's absolutely incredible. Look at specifically A Miracle Would Happen, and compare that to a lot of music of William Finn. I'll give you a specific if you can get your hands on it. There's a song called Passover. It's in a song collection called Elegies. Compare Passover to A Miracle Would Happen. Just play the two of them back to back, and you'll hear how Jason Robert Brown never misses a syllable which needs an accent. He hits them all. And he never really hits an unaccented syllable in a jarring way, whereas William Finn will often get some very, very strange pronunciations and syllables like, whoa, why did that get an accent? It's because it's fallen right where that groove is happening, and he didn't adjust it the way Jason Robert Brown will adjust it. Jason Robert Brown will either syncopate it and move it, or rewrite it so that it's quite far from it. William Finn doesn't always do that. And as long as you're comparing those two, I would highly recommend you do that. Compare it to You Got Trouble back from Music Man and the Cop song from Urinetown. Look at all 4 of those. The Cop song from Urinetown, it's a hard, cold tumble of a journey, worthy of a gurney, a bumble down, a slap face, smacked by a mate. And so has a similar sort of way that you got trouble. You got trouble, I say, right here in River City. I say it takes, where's the, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pockets on the table. Pockets make the difference between a gentleman and a bum. With a capital B, and that stands for P, and that stands for pool. You hear the elements that I've been talking about. There's a lot of syllables in between accents. Compare You Got Trouble to the Cop song from Urinetown with that in mind, and then listen to A Miracle Would Happen, where there's even longer stretches. And do one last thing. Look at the way A Miracle Would Happen is literally prose. It's not. He's typed it like. You'll see in the libretto, it looks like free verse, but it's not. Let me read you just a couple of sentences from A Miracle Would Happen. if you just take out the carriage returns, you wind up with, everyone tells you that the minute you get married, every other woman in the world suddenly finds you attractive. Well, that's not true. It only affects the kind of women you always wanted to sleep with, but they wouldn't give you the time of day before, and now they're banging down your door and falling to their knees. Now, that is not poetry. That's not quatrains. That's not scansion. That is prose. But look at the way he sets that and how it becomes lyric. It's just an amazing thing. Whereas, you got Trouble, My Friend, right here, and I say Trouble right here in Rivers, I'm a billiard player. That feels a little more like poetry, a little bit more sing-songy stuff. That's not pejorative. I'm just trying to, when you're comparing it, look at how Jason Robert Brown writes conversational prosody. He actually writes out the conversation and then figures out how to set it. William Finn's stuff is a little more driven by the music isn't as mutable. Jason Robert Brown will write in 5/4 bars or 7/4 bars or triplets or five-plets over some syllables. He'll sort of smash them together, like we were talking about in that one example about really early on. What if I can put my fingers on that quickly? But I can't. Where it was going, where we had, early on in the first unit, we were talking about duka, 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 do, 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 where there was triplets, and it had to be triplets in order to make rhythmical sense. Jason Robert Brown will have 4, 5, 6, 7 syllables in order to make it make rhythmic sense, and he'll just put a 7 over it in order to hit that downbeat. William Finn doesn't always do that, and so as a consequence, he'll get some funky accents, like, wow, I really shouldn't get an accent in there. All right. So that concludes prosody. Like I said at the end of the previous unit about linear prosody, you gotta make all of these things work. Otherwise, it's going to be it's going to interfere with your clarity and interfere with your message. I've tacked on this little lecture about conversational prosody because it's kind of it's the current wave of the future. We'll see how long it lasts. It might last forever. It's quite wonderful when done well. It's quite awful when it's done poorly. I don't know if you are a conversational prosodist, whether you want to write lyrics which have the drive of and the prosiness of Jason Robert Brown, or whether you're more of a structuralist and want to back up to Meredith Willson and stuff like that. Regardless of your rhythmical tendencies, these principles are still going to apply to you. You gotta, get the diction and the rhythm and all those other things that I said at the end of the previous unit. They all have to be working, and even more so in conversational prosody. It's not looser. It's in fact tighter and even more demanding, because when you blow it, it's just so jarring. And when you get it right, you don't even notice. It's so seamless. All right? I will leave you with that, my friends, and wish you the best of luck. Thank you. Bye-bye.